Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to our webinar on commercial leases and negotiation, provided by the City of Los Angeles's Department of Cannabis Regulation. I am Ernesto Morales, CEO of North Star Alliances, and I will be your moderator tonight. Thank you for joining us this evening for a deep dive into commercial leases and negotiation. This webinar is part of the official launch of the Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance Program for social equity applicants in the great city of Los Angeles. The goal of this program is to help applicants obtain a commercial cannabis license, as well as operate a successful cannabis business. Now, before we get started, let's take a moment to review some housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process on DCR's website. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio functions will not be available to you during this session. However, you will be able to see and hear all the panelists. There's an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on information being provided. Please use caution when sharing personal information in a public forum and keep your questions focused on tonight's topic. Please ask questions. Ask questions about tonight's subject matter in the Q&A box. We are gathering and responding to your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll have a robust Q&A session where we will also get responses to your questions during the last 20 minutes of tonight's event. You are encouraged to utilize the Q&A box located at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. Chat is available for interaction with the other participants. If you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone will be able to see the questions when they are answered. Finally, please note that the content presented tonight was not created by the Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles and is solely for informational purposes only. This information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede the Los Angeles Municipal Code nor constitute legal advice. If you have specific questions regarding tonight's or other topics, please call 213-978-0738 during business hours, which are Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. to speak to a DCR representative. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce this evening's subject matter expert, Rodrigo Gonzalez. Rodrigo is the founder and CEO of Diodate, a Los Angeles-based corporate real estate strategy and transactional consulting firm. He is also the head of City Miles Strategic Capital and its inaugural fund, City Miles DDI Fund 1, that is focused on food grade and food logistics industrial assets throughout the United States. For the past 15 years, he has represented both Fortune 500 and mid-cap companies, national food groups, life science conglomerates, corporate developers, individual investors and operators, governments, and nonprofit organizations in nearly $4 billion of project strategy management, real estate strategy consulting, and transactional brokers services throughout the United States, as well as representation of global clients in Europe and Asia. As part of its commitment to the community, Diodate was selected by Pepperdine University's Real Estate Institute to serve as an industry advisor to graduate students in real estate and in advising the City of Los Angeles in the creative identification, use, and development of over 9,000 parcels across the city, creating strategies that help shape investment, land use, and development practices in Los Angeles for years to come. Rodrigo Gonzalez is a member of the Real Estate Executives Forum, the Urban Land Institute, CoreNet Global Organization for Corporate Real Estate, and the International Council of Shopping Centers. He is also the current chairman of the board of directors for the Catholic Association of Latino Leaders. He's also a member of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles Committee on Housing and is a past leadership council member for the Fulfillment Fund, a Los Angeles-based nonprofit focused on mentorship of disadvantaged students. Rodrigo received his master's degree in business administration from Pepperdine University School of Business and Management and his Bachelor of Arts from the University of California. Rodrigo is a state of California real estate corporate broker. He resides in Pasadena with his wife Diana and their children, Isaac and Penelope. Without further ado, I would like to ask Rodrigo to join me on screen. Welcome, Rodrigo, and feel free to start sharing your screen and starting your presentation tonight.
Thank you so much, Ernesto, and thanks to everyone that's on this webinar today. I think the fact that you guys are on here and looking to learn more about what is a pretty important component of launching not only a cannabis business, but any business, the negotiation of commercial leases. Kudos to you all for being here, and I trust that this will be of value to you all. So we'll start with real estate leasing part 1, commercial leases and negotiation. There's a lot of material to go over here, but I do invite all of you to kind of relate back not only to this webinar, which is going to be posted, but also additional resources that will be made available to you all online to come back and get any additional details that you feel you may have missed as we're presenting, right? So in terms of a presentation overview, we're going to go over a few industry specific issues. I think, as you all know, cannabis related issues when it comes to commercial leasing are pertinent to tenants, and there's also a lot of misconceived notions on the landlord side. We're going to go through the process of negotiating a lease from a very high level. All these negotiations are very specific and should be assessed on a one-on-one and on a one-by-one basis, but we're going to take a high-level overview of it. The offer process and the lease negotiation, right? Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about some lease strategy do's and don'ts with regards to how you enter a negotiation or how you enter really your site selection process in as a whole, and we'll go over that as well, right? So lastly, site selection best practices. Site selection is a very important component of any business that's launching, specifically those of you who are thinking of entering into a retail type of establishment, because a lot of your, as you've heard with real estate, location, right? But with this industry specifically, it's location, regulation, and a bunch of other stuff. So I think it's very important for you all to take site selection very seriously, because it very directly impacts whether or not you can even operate at all in certain parts of the city, right? So lastly, some resources available to you all. So industry specific issues, you know, we all know that there's a stigma over cannabis related businesses. A lot of them are perceived. A lot of them come from many years, you know, of landlords thinking that a cannabis related business may be something that it's not, right? So I think one of the things that you're stepping into this lease process, these negotiation process, is the understanding that there are a lot of landlords, a lot of commercial real estate brokers, and a lot of individuals that may touch a transaction that may have ill-conceived, or just frankly that may not, you know, have all the specifics in mind as to this is a growing and viable industry, one that obviously through webinars such as this, you know, has the backing of the city of Los Angeles and a lot of other municipalities, and one that really is entering into the mainstream. It's been for the last couple of years, and it continues to grow for years to come, right? So there's just a lot of very specific issues that are related to this, to the cannabis industry. So I think it's super helpful to have a really, really good understanding of site selection, right? You know, there's a lot of radius restrictions related to cannabis use, right? I think one of the first things, and this is your job as a tenant, not the broker that you hire, the agent that you hire, your job as a tenant, because it's your business. It's really your number one requirement to understand how your site selection or where you're looking to lease a space, how does that fit into that municipalities? How does that fit into City of LA and to their cannabis related corridors and restrictions, right? There are radius restrictions associated with proximity to schools, proximity to different type of other businesses, in some cities, houses of worship. So you also have to understand, that's level one. Level two is you have to understand what other requirements, such as, building grade, meaning, are you gonna be looking at a first floor or a second floor? Does the entrance into the building, is it ADA compliant? Does the building or the shopping center allow itself for the adequate security necessary to locate your business there? Is it accessible, right? There are great locations with minimal parking. It really depends on how you see the strategy for your location and what kind of access it has. Is it nearby freeways? Is it near transit, public transit? And visibility, right? How many eyes are going to be driving, riding, or walking past your location? So site selection is critical for any business. Cannabis is not exempt from that, right? It's also hugely critical for cannabis-related businesses. And this also goes to, and I have to mention, for non-retail establishments, so whether it be lab, distribution, or warehousing, it's equally important to understand site selection with regards to ingress and egress, because it also will impact transportation. How far do your vans or your vehicles have to go to and from deliveries and whatnot? So also hugely important for those type of businesses as well. So I think there are many landlords who fully understand what cannabis and the cannabis industry is like today. There are a lot of those that fear and feel that bringing on a cannabis related tenant will lower the building value, that they may or may not drive other tenants away, and they may attract dangerous or negative attention and activities, right? Some of these are perceived risks, really, but really, I think it's your job as the tenant to be able to communicate a sense of stability, a sense of professionalism, to kind of squash some of those fears and misunderstandings of the industry, right? This leads to potential community members that may, again, have ill-conceived notions or a misunderstanding about the cannabis industry, and that may oppose it in the area, right? I think some of you may have gone through the permitting process where folks showed up and kind of pushed back on a potential cannabis-related business. Others, may say, well, I just don't want it here because school children will walk by, not fully understanding that more often than not, at least it's been my experience, it's really a business like any other, right? And a retail like any other. Let me see here. So we're going to enter and talk about a little bit about the process of negotiating a lease. And I think it's a team effort, right? Of course, you're the captain of the ship. It's your job to do as much due diligence as you can. But what's equally important is to have the right team in place, right? And there are several people that will touch the negotiation process of a lease, but there are a few main players, right? So it's important to find a reputable commercial real estate firm that focuses on a specific geographic area. You may want to discuss a few folks, if it's retail, that focus on the retail space. There are brokerages out there or agents out there that have a specific area of focus in the cannabis space. It's very important that you understand fee structure. Fee structure mean with regards to what kind of commissions are being asked for here. More often than not, specifically in the state of California, specifically in Los Angeles County, an agent representing you in a very direct broker to tenant relationship, they will be paid by the landlord more often than not, especially if that space is listed on a public or industry-wide search engine or MLS, multiple listing service sites such as LoopNet or CoStar, CityFeet, etc. Right? So that's something to know off the bat. It's somewhat out of market if an agent asks you to pay them a fee to find a listing for them for you to lease. Usually the landlord will pay that, because the landlord usually will hire their own real estate firm to represent them to bring on a tenant, right? Talk to a few of them. This is an individual that you may be visiting dozens of sites with. So make sure that you're comfortable with the way they do business. You're comfortable with their level of expertise, right? So that's hugely important. Make sure most commercial real estate agents will be able to navigate you through negotiating the business terms. They all should be able to help you navigate through the business terms of a lease, or a letter of intent, which we'll cover in a bit. But you also want legal advice, because a real estate lease is very much a binding contract. It's a binding document. It's one that requires a lot of, that carries a lot of legal clauses in it. And I think it's important, once you have a general structure of the business terms, to invest in the resources, or invest in an attorney that is familiar with real estate leases, for them to look at very important clauses that have direct impacts to your business and direct impacts to you down the line, should something go sideways, right? There are amazing resources available to you. Obviously, the Los Angeles County Bar Association has resources that can help, right? But it's important that you familiarize yourself with the fact that there is the real estate side on the business terms that a broker or an agent can assist you with. And there's also the legal side, which a real estate agent or broker really doesn't have the educational background or the license to be able to really look at some of the legal clauses in earnest, right? Again, huge resource, Los Angeles County Bar Association. So look for their cannabis section. So accountants, once you start getting into leases that are really any lease, you're being vetted not only for what kind of use or what kind of tenancy you're bringing to the table, but you're also being qualified in terms of credit worthiness as a tenant, right? It's very alike you qualifying for a credit card or a large acquisition or a large purchase, but more so as a business, right? They will want to look at, or they will typically ask for a profit and loss statement, a balance sheet, or tax return. So profit and loss statement, essentially what your business is bringing in and what's going out. They want to see that there's profitability in the business, because if there isn't profitability, then how are you going to pay your rent, right? Balance sheets, what kind of assets and what kind of debts you may have on the books that may impact your ability to pay the rent. And tax returns, right? Do your tax returns, profit and loss statements, and balance sheets all mesh up with what you're saying, right? They typically will ask for 1 to 2 years of these type of documentation. And for a lot of you out there that may be new as a business, this may be difficult to obtain. And there's ways, not to get around it, but there's ways that you can supersede that. It may be taking on a space that maybe the landlord won't ask for that, but they may ask for additional deposit, right? Or they may ask for a higher rent. But in essence, you want to provide a landlord with as much peace of mind that you are a stable tenant and that you will be able to pay the rent as negotiated in the lease, right? So I think it's important to let your accountant know that you are in the leasing process, to prepare those documents, because it is par for the course. I mean, it's very typical. The longer term you'd like, right? If it's 3 to 5 years plus, it's absolutely, it's almost a given that the landlord is going to require these type of documents from you. And a lot of the times it's not only the landlord that's requiring them. A lot of the times the lenders, if there's debt on the property, there's a mortgage on the property, will also like to see these kind of documents that the lender will require of the landlord as well. So your banker, right? This will be important as well. At times when filling out your tenant application and providing your offer to lease a space, you will also be asked for statements. Sometimes, there are creative ways to get around a lack of background or lack of financial documents for a few years back by way of a letter of credit from a banker. All that can be negotiated. So it is very important that you let your banker know that you're also going through the leasing process, because they will be a resource for you down the line. Contractors, look, every tenant that's going into a space will need to do tenant improvements, getting the space ready for your business, right? Whether it be putting up walls, putting up counters, storefronts, etc., or even more specific uses or heavier construction. It's really important that you have a right contractor in mind, because a big part of the negotiation is the TIA, or the tenant improvement allowance. And a lot of the times you will negotiate an allowance, let's say $10 a square foot, that the landlord will pay. More often than not, they will reimburse you after you pay of, let's say, $10 for a 1,000 square foot location. That's a $10,000 allowance to do a build out. So it's important that you have a reputable contractor to know what you have to play with, right? If they think that the build out will cost $11,000 and you were able to negotiate an allowance of $10,000, then out of pocket, you only put $1,000, right? And so on and so forth. So it's very important that you have the right contractor in mind as well, because they do play into the negotiation process. So let's jump into the offer process. We're going to talk about the letter of intent, the LOI. More often than not in commercial real estate, the first offer is made on this form. It's a 2 to 3 page document which states the overarching business points. And that's provided from the agent to the other agent or to the landlord. Then we'll head into financials and tenant application. In some instances, when you're dealing directly with the landlord, they will require a tenant application and also to be able to run your credit and whatnot. Then the lease and the lease guarantee, again, very much legal documents, they're contracts, they're legally binding. The lease will set up the business and legal terms of your tenancy there, or your contract to lease that space. The lease guarantee details what entity or what individual is guaranteeing, and is exactly what it sounds like, the lease in case the business stops operating, right? More often than not, a new tenant will have to personally guarantee the lease, meaning that their personal assets may be on the hook for what's left over in rent in terms of the lease. Once you start growing and you have more years under your belt, you can start pushing for a corporate guarantee where the business itself is guaranteeing the lease and whatever leftover consideration or whatever leftover rent is in place, right? So letter of intent, again, 2 to 4 page document. 99 times out of 100, it's non-binding, right? It's not a legal document. It just stipulates what business terms, rent, how long you be in the space, how much tenant improvement allowance you're requesting, how much security deposit you're looking to place, and it should be non-binding again, right? But usually, while it's non-binding, the lease will be built upon this document. Well, there it is, right? So at least built upon the negotiated terms in the LOI. So it's very important that you can't also propose something and then switch it during the lease negotiation, or that negotiation will break down. So they're going to follow most of the main overarching points of the lease, the business points. Who's the tenant, right? Meaning who's leasing the space. What is being leased? If it is one building, it'll stipulate this address and it's this much square footage, because the square footage has a direct impact as to how much rent you're paying. If it is a part of a shopping center, you want to say is unit such and such with this much square footage, right? That's also very important to identify. Square footage is very important. That impacts your rent. what the use will be, if it is retail cannabis, etc. You want to provide as much detail as possible in a very professional manner so the landlord knows exactly what it is that you're going to be selling there, and be as transparent as you can from the get-go. Term, how amount of time in years and months you're going to be there initially, or you're committing to. Typically, it can be more often than not, if there's a lease in place, you're looking at the very least 1 year. Currently in Los Angeles County, you're looking at a baseline of about 3 years, but it's usually 3 to 5 years. Leases can go on for many years. But in retail, you're looking at about 3 to 5 years. Rent commencement, when you will start paying rent. Sometimes there's improvements to be made, construction to be had. So rent commencement isn't exactly sometimes when you take possession of the space, that they may differ. So it's important to get rent commencement agreed to. Base lease rent, right? How much per square foot you will be paying to rent the space. So if it's $1 a square foot and it's 100 square feet, you're paying $100 a month, right? Triple nets are amounts that the landlord charges or pass-throughs of property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. This is more common in single tenant buildings. When it's one building, you pay the property taxes, insurance, and the taxes. If it is a shopping center and you are leasing 100 square feet out of 1,000, you're going to be paying 10% of the triple net charges, right? And these are mostly fixed. There's not a lot of room for negotiation because the property taxes they are what they are, and as is the insurance and the maintenance. Although you do have a chance to audit. Most times that they have triple net, you should have the chance to audit at the end of the year what you were charged for to make sure you weren't being overcharged. Again, important to run this through with an attorney that knows how to handle leases. So triple net, if it's $1 a square foot times 1,000 square feet times. So let me see here. Oh, it's what we said earlier. So if it's 10 cents a square foot, you have base rent of $1,000, right? That's $1 a square foot times 1,000 square feet, and 10 cents a square foot for triple net times 1,000 square feet, 100 square feet. So you're going to pay both monthly, $1,100 a month, right? That's a triple net lease. Escalations. Typically, cost of living increases, inflation, some of them tie it to consumer price index, CPI. More often than not, though, there'll be fixed escalations of 2.5% to 3% per year. Meaning, if you're paying $1,000 in year one, year two for the base rent, year two, it will be $1,030 or 3% above, right? And then year three, it's 3% of that, and so on. Option periods. So if you negotiate a base term, an initial term of 3 years, 36 months, and you also negotiate 2 one-year options, it means that you have the right to have tenancy of the space for 3 years, but you also have the option to extend the lease 2 times for 1 year each for a total potential term of 5 years, right? There are notification windows for this. You typically have to notify a landlord anywhere between 9 to 6 months before the term is up, right? But again, this is all negotiable. Parking is very important. How many spaces do you need? Because this relates not only to how you want your location situated and how you want to provide parking for your patrons, but it also relates to how many parkings do you actually need to get your certificate of occupancy or your business license from the city, right? So it's very important that this is negotiated in the lease. More often than not, for retail uses in city of Los Angeles, parking requirements will range between 3 to, at the very top end, 5 spaces per every 1,000 square feet. You will negotiate the landlord work, what work the landlord has to do before you move into the space. Pretty standard that they should have all the working systems in order, meaning HVAC, air conditioning, plumbing, electrical, and structural. That should be, more often than not, that's handled by the landlord. Other times the landlord is required to have the space ready for ADA compliance. That's typically the case when the tenant is not really doing any sort of build out or construction of their own. They're just going to step into it. but this is something to consider. Other times it's just flooring and paint, right? You can also negotiate the signage on the front or storefront and whatnot. And then the tenant work, right? Whether it be by tenant improvement allowance, but also what work are you going to be doing to the space? Are you going to be adding rooms? Are you going to be adding a restroom? Are you going to be adding a small warehouse area, et cetera, right? What work will the tenant be doing? Lastly, free rent. Free rent's typically negotiated to give the tenant time and to give them some financial relief while they're doing their build out. Sometimes they will say, you know, my contractor requires 3 months from the time that we sign to the time that we start paying you rent. We need 3 months of free rent on the front end. Other times when there's an ample amount of work done by the tenant and it's a longer lease, you can request free rent as an incentive because you're improving the space so much for the landlord, right? So this is typically free rent, at least in my experience, you start seeing free rent after about when you're negotiating a 3-year term. They're less likely on a shorter lease because there's just less months of rent to go around, right? So once you start getting into 5 years plus, some folks think that an ample amount of 1 month of free, the equivalent of 1 month of free rent per year. But again, all of that is negotiable and it's on a case-by-case basis. Bear in mind, for really good locations, you're also going to be negotiating in competition with other potential tenants, and some of them may use free rent or a lack thereof in their negotiation to get a leg up, right, in a negotiation. But your real estate agent should be able to walk you and navigate you through that. What the security deposit will be, in some cases for credit tenants, is usually sometimes it's just their first month's rent. Sometimes it's even zero. But for more often than not, you will see a mix of first and last month plus a month or two of security deposit. It all depends on the credit worthiness of the tenant, how much improvements the landlord will be making, et cetera, et cetera. And the guarantor, very important, right? For a lot of new tenants, the guarantor will be you. You and your personal assets will be guaranteeing the rent on the lease. If you're paying $1,000 a month for 36 months, you're guaranteeing personally that your business will pay $36,000 with escalations and whatnot in terms of a lease, right? So this is very important in terms of a guarantor. So a financial tenant application, and you'll see a version of this in the resources page. It's very much like it's a credit application, right? They ask for social security number. If it's an incorporated business, they'll ask for the EIN number, the IRS, identification number, driver's license, bank account information in terms of, what you have in business checking or savings accounts, as well as references from past landlords, et cetera. So it's very important that you answer as earnestly as possible and as professionally as possible as well. Again, full name, address, social, bank balance, and employer information are pretty much standard for this application. So the lease is the most important part of the negotiation. It carries legal, financial, and operational consequences, and we'll get into that in a bit. It can range from anywhere from, we've seen leases from 6 pages, very short, to over 100 pages. It really depends on, as you start, it really depends on what the landlord will prefer. Luckily, there are pretty standard lease forms out there, and there's a lot of examples online and in the resources page as well that you can start seeing some sample clauses that are fairly standard across the board. In all cases, you'll see a lot of similar clauses, just worded differently from one lease form to another, right? But again, get help from a legal professional that knows how to navigate these leases. They will be able to go through them a lot more quickly than you would be, and just provide a little bit of peace of mind with regards to clauses that may be that you may feel uneasy about. The lease guarantee, again, it states the entity or individual that's guaranteeing the lease and is taking financial responsibility. Very important that you get help from a legal professional. Again, because you're putting up personal assets at time to guarantee business assets, and they're separate for a reason. And there's times where it's a corporate guarantee or a business guarantee where you're putting up business assets to guarantee the lease. So very important that you have a full understanding of the lease guarantee form. So a couple of lease strategy do's and don'ts. Very important to understand the good and the bad portions of any leasing process, just so that you fully understand and own the process, right? So the do's: hire a professional. It's worthwhile. It'll save you time and it will save you money. And really it's for peace of mind, right? Hire the right agent, broker, the right attorney, the right contractor, and engage the right accountant and get the right person at your bank to help you. Do your own homework. Do not expect the agent or the broker or even the attorney to know more about where you can locate your business than you. When it comes to the legal aspects of it, yeah, rely on your attorney. When it comes to the brokerage component, absolutely rely on your broker, but do not rely on anyone. Do your own homework. There's plenty of resources out there, including through this program. Very much understand where you can operate within a jurisdiction. One of the worst things you can go through is go through a 4-month process of looking for a site. You find the perfect one, you start negotiations only to find out that you are not allowed to open your cannabis related business there. And understand your market and your customer, right? Make sure that you fully understand who the end user is, and the end user is your customer, right? So you want to make sure that you are operating and researching and selecting the right place and structuring the right lease for that, and with that in mind. I really want to emphasize this: be as professional and as corporate as possible. Even though some of the misunderstandings and ill-conceived notions that a landlord may have or the community may have with cannabis related businesses, even though they may be just perceived, they're still their reality. So it's very important, and it's your job as a tenant to present yourself as professional and as corporate as possible, so that they are put at ease with that they're bringing on a successful and thriving business that hopefully will be in their location, paying them rent for many, many years to come. View multiple locations in multiple areas. Don't just double down on one area. There's so much movement in the commercial real estate space and so much competition that you just have to diversify your strategy and look at multiple spaces at once. Okay, very important. So don't ignore legal help. I mean, there are hundreds of reasons why, hundreds of examples why, don't ignore legal help. And there's a lot of resources for you, this one included. Don't forget about potential neighbors, and be cognizant of who your potential neighbors will be, right? I mean, be strategic as to where you want to put your business, and be mindful that the tenants already next to you, to that space, are going to be potential neighbors. So be respectful and professional with them as well. And also make sure that they align with the strategy of how you want your business to be perceived and how you want it to operate, right? Make sure that it aligns with it. Don't expect a quick process. In City of Los Angeles, the site selection process to find the right location can be anywhere from 1 month to 6 months. The LOI negotiation process can be anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks. The lease negotiation process could be a few months, and that is before you start getting into the permitting process with the local municipality. So it is not a quick process. And don't sign the lease until you have everything lined up with the local municipality and you've connected with them. Again, going back to the example I made, don't do all this legwork to then just find out that you're not allowed to operate there. And don't overpay. Look, there may be a lot of misconceptions about cannabis, and there's people who mention out there in the industry that there's something such as the cannabis tax, where you should pay more because you are a cannabis related business, and either A, because if they're going to allow you to be there, you should pay more, or B, because they think you make a ton of money and your business makes a ton of money, you should be allowed to be there. No, there are controls in place for that. Do not overpay above market. Just continue looking for the right situation for you, because down the line, if you start paying high on the front end, that will put a tremendous pressure, like in any business, on your fixed expenses going forward, right? And don't settle, right? Don't settle for the wrong location, for the wrong space, for the wrong city, or for the wrong landlord. That can have tremendous impacts to you down the line. You know, a couple of months of extra waiting are worthwhile when you're stepping into a contract that could be in place for years, if not decades in some instances. Do not forget about parking and access, right? Super important, both from a operational and just common sense standpoint, but also from a zoning and building and safety standpoint with the city. You know, do not forget about parking and access. So best practices, right? Before you negotiate a space, you need to find the right locations. And this is pertaining to site selection. You know, most large companies such as McDonald's and Starbucks have whole teams that do site selection for them. Hugely important, right? First, again, understand where you can operate. Understand how your clients will get to your location, right? If it's the perfect area, but it's not really close to any, you know, freeways, public transportation, or access, you know, or access is difficult, that's going to have a direct impact to your clients. Understand demographics, density, you know, density, there's areas that have less density than others in terms of people per square mile, right? Traffic counts are important. There's some streets that, even though they're wider streets, don't have as much traffic per day as others. And other important figures, again, related to site selection, right? Again, there's a ton of really good resources and attachments here and on the census website that can allow you to understand the demographics behind where you're looking to place your business. So if you have additional questions, please contact DCR here. And I think there's a ton of places where they put this information on, but there's a lot of resources out there for you, right? And I think this is kind of concluding part one. And I think we're just going through directly to part two. Is that correct, Ernesto? I believe we are.
Actually, how long is part two?
I think it's about 22 minutes.
Yeah, I think we're gonna wrap up with, because we are at 6:42. So we'll go ahead and jump to questions.
Okay.
If that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, a lot of really good information. And I know myself as a property lease, I lease property, how important all the components that you just shared are to running the business and making sure that you have the right location and the right pricing and the like, and even the right landlord. So thanks so much for that information. So we're gonna go to a few questions, so that way our listeners can get some more information about maybe specific questions that they have. We'll start off with, what do you feel is the most important when making an offer on a space between rent, deposit, etc.?
I think it's going to be looked at as a holistic offer. They're going to look at it, you know, how much you're offering in relation to the deposit, in relation to how much improvements you're requesting. But I think if I had to pick any of them, I would pick provide a fair market rate from what they're offering, but just provide a very professional offer, right? I think that goes, it's not a direct answer, but it goes very long ways to provide a professional offer that is well structured and well presented, with a clear, and this is very important, with a clear explanation of what you're looking to place there and what you have in mind for your business there. I think that's very important. Outside of that, you know, the landlord is going to be looking at how much they're going to be bringing in by way of rent and how much is going to be going out of pocket by way of what kind of improvements or construction you're requesting.
Right. No, it makes total sense. Next question. How can I make a landlord feel at ease in taking a cannabis business as a tenant?
Yeah, I think acknowledge the fears that they may have from the get-go. Number one, you know, communicate it. Listen, I understand that you may have some misconceptions about our industry, but let me explain to you how we like to operate. And secondly, communicate as professionally as possible. And, you know, and also don't, like we said, don't overpay. Also hold your own, you know, respect yourself as a tenant, because the tenant is what brings the value to any commercial real estate property. So there's a lot of value in you coming in as well.
Right. No, definitely. Another question, what is the best way to establish credit as from a tenant standpoint, especially if you're starting off new and looking for your first space and starting your business?
I think have your books well presented and in order. I mean, that's more on the business side, but that's very important. But if you're starting your business, you're going to probably end up in a space that doesn't really require that the landlord may not really require that much from you in terms of paperwork. So it may not be as good of a space as you'd want it to be. Make your payments on time and have a great rapport with the landlords. Start establishing credit worthiness from the get-go. Outside of that, it's going to based on the strength of your business, right? They're going to want to see how strong your financials are in terms of, at the end of the day, they just want to know that you're not bringing risk to the building, which you're not, and you also have the capacity to pay your rent for a long, long time.
Yeah, so that brings a good point. So if really starting out as a new business and basically don't have a long financial history or credit history relative to leasing, what does that mean for people that are trying to get space or warehouse space or any type of space?
You're going to have to make concessions, right? Because there's not a lot that you can prove that you can, that you're going to be a longstanding tenant. So, you may not get as much TI allowance, tenant improvement allowance, as you'd want to. You may not get as low of a rate as you'd like to. You may be required to pay a month or two extra of deposit, right? But all of that kind of gets taken care of the longer you're in successful business, right? The longer that you're operating, things are going well, and you're making your payment on time, the better the situation is for the next location or for an upgraded location.
Right. So what would be, and again, starting off for whether established business or new business, what would be a reasonable increase over year to year for rent increase for any type of space?
Yeah, for retail, if they're requiring you to pay more than 3% per year, just know that it's beyond market. That's beyond, like, you're just paying more than market at that point. And I think in the next, in part two, we'll start getting into some of those details. But for retail in LA County, if you're paying beyond 3%, you're kind of paying towards the very top of market. If it's beyond 4%, very rare, and you're really overpaying. At that point, you should consider looking at other options. Except if you're in the industrial space. If you're looking for warehousing and distribution, right now, because of lack of inventory, you're looking at 3.5% to 4.5% annual escalations.
Wow. Yeah. It's interesting what COVID has done, right? I mean, what's been the impact of COVID relative to these types of spaces?
Yeah, I mean, e-commerce and the growth of e-commerce has just taken up industrial space. It's also hit a lot of retail locations. So presumably you should be able to find a space because there's a good amount of vacant retail space, right? Unfortunately, there was a lot of retail establishments that were impacted to the benefit of e-commerce, right? People just stopped going out to shop. It was delivered directly to home. So while industrial space got more expensive in many areas, retail space became a little bit more affordable.
So talking a little bit about pricing again, are there any avenues or resources to tap in when you feel like a landlord is price gouging?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the Los Angeles County Bar Association is a good place to start. This is something that your broker and agent should also be monitoring, because there's a realm of market, and if they're price gouging, I mean, it's something that they shouldn't be doing, and I would not feel obligated to pay that just because you want to get into a space very badly. There's a lot of landlords that understand the industry that would be more than happy to treat you as they would any other tenant.
That helps a lot.
Yeah.
You spoke a lot about retail leases. How do some of the things that we discussed tonight change for storage or warehousing or lab related tenants in the cannabis space?
Yeah, I think your site selection, for example, on the warehousing space will change again, because you'll have to look at what your traditional delivery routes look like. Is the customer coming to you, or are you going to be shipping out directly? ingress and egress change? Is it going to be regular vans coming up where you just need a roll-up door, or do you need a loading dock if it's higher volume, right? Security changes as well, right? It's different to secure a smaller retail space than it is to secure a 10 to 20,000 square foot warehouse as well, right? So that's different for a lab space. It's more, zoning and local ordinance as to where you can have a quasi medical or a kind of flex-based scientific type of use. So that's also something else to consider as well. If it's lab space, a lot of times what we see is you're kind of limited to first floor office or first floor or single floor warehouse because of vibration. In terms of you doing any type of instrument work that requires low vibration, you wouldn't be on a second floor.
That makes total sense. So one really key point, and you make reference to it a few times, how much should an attorney be charging for a review of a lease document?
Yeah, it's an attorney that knows what they're doing. Typically, attorneys will range, from independent practitioners, $300 to $500 an hour. And there's a lot of standard leases. One of them is the AIR form that we'll get into in a little bit. They're very familiar with those leases. So if there's not a lot of changes that are heavy, it should be a couple $1,000s.
Okay. No, that you have to factor in all those costs, right? Especially when you're starting up brand new. So if you had to say, what are the top 2 or 3 kind of key points that you would make to someone that is looking for space, especially if they're kind of new to the kind of leasing, whether it be a retail space or a warehouse space? What are the kind of 2 or 3 top things that you would recommend?
I think you should know exactly where you should be looking at space. That should be first and foremost. Otherwise, you're going to be spinning your wheels looking at areas that are not approved for your use. Number one, and there's a lot of resources for that. There's like literally visual maps that tell you you can be here and not here, right? That's number one. I think number 2 is structure all of your team and all of the paperwork that's going to be required of you in as professional of a manner as possible. And number 3, just do your own homework. Just don't rely on brokers, agents, or attorneys. Just do your own homework, because at the end of the day, they walk away from the deal after it's done. You're staying with the lease and the business, right?
All right, I'm going to ask this one last question, and it talks about money again.
Yeah.
And we talked about, you mentioned triple net, and we know it's part of a number of the leases that are negotiated. Can the triple net fees be negotiated?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, usually when it's a property that's requiring triple net, either it's because it's again a single tenant building, but more often than not, it's when it's a corporate landlord or and what we call an institutional landlord, like most malls are triple net, or large shopping centers are triple net. But yeah, all of it is negotiated. At that point, you can maybe negotiate out of maybe paying the property taxes, but you'll pay the maintenance and the insurance, or you'll do the taxes and the insurance, but you feel like the landlord should do the maintenance. So yeah, it's all negotiable. And landlords will change their situation from one day to another, depending on how they feel how quickly they feel they need to bring a tenant into their building.
So I'm going to throw one more at you. I said that was the last one, but anything is possible, right?
Yeah.
How detailed should the letter of intent be? I know that you mentioned letter of intent. How detailed should that be?
Yeah, I think that in terms of the numbers and cents, it's pretty black and white. When it's specifying who the tenant is, I think a few paragraphs are important at the end of the letter, just stating who you are as a tenant. That's always important. But more often than not, your agent will have a template for it that is pretty straightforward to a point. It's very black and white, right? Square footage, this much, rate, this much, term, this much, etc.
Okay, awesome. Well, Rodrigo, thank you so much. Learned a lot, even though I've been leasing space for many years now. I learned a lot, and I appreciate the information. I know our listeners did as well. And again, this video will be up on DCR's website for reference. So we definitely look forward to more information as it relates to this very important topic, because I know sometimes there's a lot of other things that are discussed, the financing, obviously the specifics about cannabis, but you have to have a place to be able to do business. So really appreciate your insights.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
So with that, I want to say a big thank you for everyone that attended this informative webinar offered by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulations Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance Program. Before signing off today, don't forget to fill out the survey about your thoughts on this webinar. The link for the survey is dropped in the Zoom chat box, and you will also receive an email with a link to the survey following this event. For more personalized support and answers to your specific question from this evening's subject matter, we're very excited to share that we will be hosting virtual drop-in office hours most Wednesdays and Fridays from 12 to 2 p.m. through March 2nd. So we have been dropping the Zoom link for you to join us in the chat box for those virtual office hours. So make sure you bookmark it and save the dates in your calendar. We definitely look forward to seeing you in the virtual office hours. In closing, our final webinar in this series on how to apply for a commercial cannabis license from the City of Los Angeles will be this Thursday, February 3rd. It will cover equity share requirements with subject matter expert Courtney Lang. Thank you all again for joining us and have a wonderful evening.